Listeners and everyone around, welcome to the More You NoCo, bringing you conversations with insightful and fascinating people all around northern Colorado. I am your host, Ivan Wayne. Let's get to it. Not all questions can be answered, at least not in our lifetime. But we can make attempts to contemplate these important questions that'll matter to people on Earth for centuries to come. Today's guest, Corey Strike, has started a company here in NoCo that aims to entertain and educate about the big questions of humanity. He wants to inspire and communicate important issues of the future with his audience through plays, events, and an online story website. Without delay, here's our conversation. Hello, listener. Welcome to another episode. I sit here at a Greeley library with Corey, our guest today, and he's got a couple of events that are coming up in the near future, including one at the Fort Collins Comic-Con, which I will also be at in August. So, Corey, let's let the listeners know, what is it that you're involved in, and what do these events entail?
My name is Corey Strike, and I am kind of billing myself as the creator and owner of S-Inc Productions. So that's the little company name I've been operating under, and I'm still workshopping taglines, so feel free to give me some feedback on this. But the way I'm phrasing it is that I hope to solve real problems through fantasy and imagination. So one of the ways I'm hoping to kind of present interesting topics and things for people to think about is through the Fort Collins Fringe Festival, which is actually either coming up or already happened July 26th, 27th, and 28th. So Friday, Saturday, Sunday, last weekend in July. And the Fringe Fest is a festival geared around, well, I don't know how they tag themselves actually, but I think of it as amateur performances meant to, again, encourage thought, response, conversation with an audience. So it's super cool in that there's a ton of unique acts. There's a circus act. There was puppet acts I saw last year. There's a seance, I think, happening at Babalu Theater, which is where my act will be performed. So my act is actually a choose your own adventure play, is how I'm billing it, called Into the Box. That's going to focus around themes of choice, control, and freedom. So when I tell people that, they tend to get a little freaked out. They don't like the idea of talking in front of an audience or having to contribute in some kind of mass forum. But this is just thumbs up or thumbs down. So the idea is the audience gets to help us choose from an outrageous number of possible endings by giving us thumbs up or thumbs down at different points throughout the show.
Interesting. You reminded me of Netflix's Bandersnatch that came out earlier this year.
That's a heavy influence for sure.
Where people can alter the story by making live choices.
Yeah, you saw that, I take it?
Mm-hmm.
What did you think? What was your impression?
I went in with very high expectations because people had kind of built it up. So I had this huge monolith list of expectations. So it was a little below that, I will say, but it was an interesting concept. And I would love to see other people try to take it on in the future, because I imagine showing up at this event in Fort Collins, right? Mm-hmm. Fringe Fest?
Babalu Theater.
Okay.
26th, 27th, and 28th.
It's not just a passive experience.
No,
it's me sitting there, and then all of a sudden, I'm influencing what you will do next. And I think there's a layer to that, because sometimes, especially with concerts or like a live broadcast of a podcast or maybe a TED Talk, a lot of people think, why should I be live if I can just YouTube it, if I can just see it on Twitter? And your experience cannot be obtained anywhere other than in that room. I think that's powerful for your audience.
You can't become a part of the experience without interacting with it, right? Like if you're just an observer, if you're completely anecdotal to the event, like you're not giving any input, you're not participating at all, it's just a different layer of interaction. Part of me wonders if it's just nostalgia, because I was super into choose your own adventure stories as a kid, just those little flip books. And my frustration with those kind of came from the same thing as your Bandersnatch. That's what it's called, right? Bandersnatch?
Yes.
It's an incredible idea that you could choose and influence a story from beginning to end, but it's super hard to do. Like making impactful choices that your audience can steer, so to speak, and have them go meaningfully disparate directions is hard. Well, if you give somebody a super meaningful choice, then that should have a plethora of outcomes, right? I mean, that's almost the definition of a meaningful choice, is something that separates you from a wide array of possible futures, I think. In Bandersnatch, a lot of those choices are like, does he have cereal or does he have coffee for breakfast?
Yeah.
And, it's fun to kind of input that. But is it having a meaningful choice on the character's future? I think a lot of the times I went through the whole Bandersnatch thing and tried to find every option, every ending. And a lot of them are cul-de-sacs, right? Like you just go, or not cul-de-sacs, but roundabouts. You think you're making a choice and you kind of circle back around and it all leads down the same road anyway. So I'm trying to create an experience that doesn't lead down one road, but yeah, that's the challenge. And I've had to do a lot of rewrites, much to the consternation of my actresses, I think. It's kind of terrifying.
Well, there's so many options. Once you diverge from one linear story, you have to be prepared for them all. And you have to flesh them all out. Yeah. So even if, let's say, very limited, you had 6 possibilities, you're doing 6 times more work for every minute you're on stage. Yeah. Or 10 or 20. And that can be overwhelming.
And 5 of those you aren't even going to use, right? Yeah. So you've wasted 5/6 of the output. That's just gone. It's hard. And basically I get around it by trying to cheat. So spoiler alert, if you are going to come see the show, in the show I preface, there are 11,000 possible different endings, 11,000 things that the audience can choose from. And I kind of back this up by having this huge script that I'm reading throughout the play, trying to mastermind this whole thing. But at the end of the play, it comes down to none of the choices were consequential. The audience interactions actually are meaningless, and whether they put their thumbs up or thumbs down, we're going to the same place anyway. So I think there are 2 different directions you can go with Choose Your Own Adventure stories. You can try and take, with current technology, and this actually kind of dovetails in with my long-term plan, so it's good. But there are 2 ways you can go with current technology, and that's to give your audience the fake impression of choice, which is what I'm trying to do. Basically saying, hey, you have all these choices, but scripting it so well, almost like a theme park ride, They have the experience of choice without actually having any choices. Or you can try and do a couple shallow offshoots, which is kind of how Bandersnatch went, I think. But, it's not the same for an experience like my play, which is going to be showing 3 times and then it's gone. With Bandersnatch, people can go in and experience that thing endlessly, right? So it's really easy to see how shallow it is after a while. But I'm hoping that on a one-off experience, this lie that I'm basically saying of this is a choose your own adventure story, and then they come in at the end and they have no choice. That's actually where I hope to get the impact from.
So what is the general content of this theme? You said you want to create experiences and stories that will also have relevant kind of life skill takeaways?
Solve real problems. Yeah. And what are real problems? Well, there are so many. Climate change is a real problem. Wealth inequality is a real problem. My full-time day job, I actually work as a project manager at an organization called the Downtown Development Authority in downtown Loveland. And there are endless problems in the downtown area that I could tell you about, My goal with my project and Essing Productions is to try and solve all of them. There's kind of a long-term and a short-term way to talk about this. In the short term, I'm not trying to be unrealistic or, anything when I say that I think all the problems that we face today, we have the resources to solve them. We just don't have the structure. We don't have the organization. I think it's been true for decades that we have enough food to feed the entire world, but getting food to hungry people is the problem. I heard somebody say recently that we don't have famines these days because of lack of food. We have famines because of wars and political differences and all these little secondary effects, but the primary problem of just growing enough food for everybody has already been solved. So what I'm interested, and especially why I'm choosing to approach this from the entertainment sector, is because I think stories are incredibly powerful. Are you a Game of Thrones fan?
I am.
You've seen the ending of it?
I have.
So spoilers, one of the concerning parts for fans with the ending of that story was this idea that, it's just the greatest story that matters. That's how we should choose our next king, is who has the best story. And that's a super weak line in a show like Game of Thrones, because it takes all this tension and world building and kind of puts it to nothing. The idea that story is the most important coming from that character is just silly. But I think it's actually true, right? I think that it's actually correct that story super matters and narrative matters. And so I think what we need, kind of the meta answer to a lot of these problems, is actually going to be coming up with a story that allows us to make the transition. This is probably going to be one of the least well-sourced conversations you have on your show, because I'm awful at remembering names and where I pick up these ideas.
As am I.
There you go. Another person I was listening to said that as we're moving through time and technology is developing and society is becoming more and more complicated, we're actually approaching a period where the human consciousness, or consciousness in general, might not be able to understand these things that are happening, right? So if you were to take a caveman and time travel him forward to today, he'd probably just like have a seizure or something, right? He wouldn't be able to comprehend.
Even maybe 500 years ago.
500 years ago. So there's this question of, in fact, did I listen to this? It might have even been on your podcast, man. This is how scattered I am in terms of where I get these ideas. But somebody was saying, look, how long is it going to be until technology increases so quickly and rapidly that even moving from one day to the next, there's some kind of gap? You know, so 500 years ago, you take somebody 500 years ago and move them till today, they have a seizure because they just can't understand what's going on. Mm-hmm. How long is it until from day to day, you know, you wake up the next day and the world is so different that you can't understand it and your brain just explodes? With the development of technology and the advancement of fields like artificial intelligence, I think we're getting closer and closer to that day. I think that's you want to talk about apocalypse, is a very interesting apocalypse where humans just wake up one day and can no longer understand the world because machines have recreated it in their own image, so to speak. Kind of going far afield to get to my point. But the point is, I think that artificial intelligence is a huge advancement that's right around the corner, potentially. I mean, maybe it's 500 years off, but maybe it could happen tomorrow. And humanity doesn't really have a story about how to deal with that. So that's what I'm trying to craft really with all of my projects, is how do we deal with machines that are as smart as people, or maybe conscious is a better way to put it. How do we deal with conscious machines?
I think a lot of authors have tried, but nobody can predict, you know, famous authors, dystopian novels, they've all tried to predict certain years or what the way things would go. Some predictions are very spot on, many are not, because it's just so hard to guess and kind of predict where a society of 7 billion people that's constantly unraveling, there's just too many moving parts. It's hard for people to predict. But it is a fascinating thing to think about. And I will agree with a person who influences me a lot, Sam Harris, that this is an important question. It's no longer just a facet of science fiction, novels and short stories. It is an important question we should be asking because the reality is coming. And a lot of people think it's just it's so far away we shouldn't even think about it. And Sam Harris has this great TED Talk where he draws a parallel to, imagine if someone said, an alien species will be here in 50 years. Get ready. Well, 50 years for an alien species and you know they're coming for sure?
Yeah.
People will be freaking out. It'd be pandemonium. We only have 50 years? Well, what, maybe general intelligence is 50 years out. Maybe it's 70. Maybe it's 4. Mm-hmm. We don't know.
Yeah.
You can have fun. You can learn these valuable experiences, but they can do it in a way that's entertaining. And you really reminded me, like, many people will watch a stand-up special on Netflix or Comedy Central, and a comedian will make an important point. Has that person heard that point before? You bet. They've heard it probably from their history teacher, an English teacher, a parent. But when the comedian got them laughing and entertained and then wove in something, a very important lesson, then it sunk in. And I think that a lot of people read fiction books, we watch fictional stories, 1, because we want to be entertained, but 2, because there are important lessons in there that we can be taught in a way that school, lectures, and our parents or family members could never touch.
Yeah. It's story again, right? I mean, humans learn primarily, I think, maybe only through story, through narrative. I remember watching Jersey Shore in college. It's like,
I did not think that was where we were going. That's funny.
Well, this is why I think it's relevant. Jersey Shore was reality in a way that very few other TV shows were reality before that. And they expressed reality by caricaturing reality, right? So it was almost, I mean, you could look at the advent of reality TV as a denigration or a backsliding, a cultural backsliding or whatever. But I think it's really an advancement because we are getting closer and closer to simulating reality as it is. And the closer we get to simulating reality as it is, the more real the lessons we learn from it are. What are the stories that I love the most? We're talking about Game of Thrones, Harry Potter. Here in the library, there was a little display set up at that front that was talking about Harry Potter and the different lessons that you can kind of take away. And all the things that they were talking about, I think, are so unnaturally natural to my life. Like it's a show about fantasy and magic, but the lessons you can take from it. I think you actually talked about this in your podcast with my friend Jules Gillian of Juiced on Imagination, how sometimes fictional stories are actually more real than nonfiction. And the lessons you can take from it are somehow more true. And I don't know why that is, but I definitely believe in that and try to focus the things I say and the stories I tell around that idea.
I think maybe to the reader and the viewer, it almost seems like an accident. Tolkien would never come out and directly describe an allegory for the Lord of the Rings. And instead, he wanted people to take what they want from it. Mm-hmm. When someone is lecturing you, you get in trouble, or you're in a college lecture. You are being told something and you're aware that you're being told that thing. You know what the person wants you to know. But when you're in the midst of a fantasy story that is quote unquote not real, it's very real to us because we pull from it what we want or what we truly see. And we're not being beaten over the head with this same message we've heard 100 times already.
Yeah. No, it was in your one with the sci-fi author, a local sci-fi author, and I forget her name, but you were talking about that and how, well, and obviously, though, in hindsight, The Lord of the Rings is somehow a metaphor for World War II, right? The Shire represents pre-Germany invasion to some degree. But you can only say that message is there maybe because Tolkien did not explicitly put it in. Sauron isn't Hitler directly. It's just close enough that you can map it on there, which is what makes it so powerful. So the question for me is, well, then how do we create a story that allows us to make this transition into what I really think is almost the pregnancy of mankind? Like we're right now pregnant with this idea of super intelligent machines. And when they arrive, it will be in some sense, I think, the first birth of humanity. Like we will have finally created something that is new in terms of life, rather than just a copy of things that have already existed. And I think that's going to be a huge change. It's going to be a scary change. If you're familiar with Sam Harris, you're familiar with kind of the doomsday scenario, what happens in a world where all human labor is unnecessary. I think in that world, we have to go back more than ever to story. You know, short term, I'm doing plays, I'm doing the Comic-Con. I'm going to have a panel at Comic-Con called When Deep Mind Wins an Eisner. That'll be talking about, well, a lot of people say that the creative side of humanity is really what separates us from machines. But what if we get to the place where machines can just generate so much story, so much content that there are diamonds in the rough? Yeah, it might take a million monkeys an infinite amount of time to craft Shakespeare, but how long does it take a super smart computer to craft a story that you and I love if it's just coming up with different iterations and then testing it against some kind of neural model? I don't think that long, and I don't think it's crazy to say that my favorite author in 10 years might be a computer program. Well, shit, what does that mean for the rest of us? What does it mean for authors, let alone the people who enjoy reading those stories?
I teach intro psych at 2 different universities out here, and one thing I talk about is the awareness of whether or not your career field is going to be impacted in your lifetime.
Wow,
and mine definitely is, because part of academia is research. And I would be severely misled if I didn't think that a general intelligence would be able to scan research papers, write it in this very prescribed format, turn it out. They'd review it probably almost immediately. Yeah. And then the journals would pump out, thousands of articles in the time it would take a human to write 1 or 2. And so while I teach and while I'm in this field of academia right now, I'm still self-aware and knowing that this is soon going to change for me. And how will I thrive and survive? Yeah. And one thing I've thought about is, like, when it comes to AI technology, I think there'll be some fields that are protected because just for the sole purpose that a lot of people would prefer to interface with a human, even if they knew the machine variant would be similar, if not arguably slightly better. Yeah. There are still people. We all know that there are degrees online. We all know that you could fully complete a bachelor's, a master's, whatever, from online in your living room in your pajamas. But why are millions of people still going to classes? Yeah. Because they want the human experience. They want to interact with another human being. And I think healthcare is going to be this way. That robots and AI will kind of take over some parts of the medical field, but a lot of people will still want their primary care physician to be a human being. Yeah. Because there's just something there. Will it stay that way for multiple generations? Maybe not. But at least the first couple of generations who grew up in a world without that AI at first. Yeah.
Makes me wonder if it almost makes our situation more dangerous. Maybe we are approaching the place where that conscious time between, what's a good way to put it? Time to come to terms with new information before you just die of a seizure or whatever. That time between, maybe we are getting closer and closer to that time because humans are kind of going to dig themselves in this little hole where we only want to interact more and more with humans and less with the machines that are becoming more and more alien to us. So that actually kind of hastens our demise. I don't know. I'm hopeful overall about the future. I think, honestly, when we talk about a general machine intelligence, we aren't talking about something that's going to be interacting with us on an individual basis. We aren't going to have a machine intelligence necessarily that's even concerned with our day-to-day workings. Just like you and I aren't concerned with the day-to-day workings of our individual body cells. We just know that they work in aggregate. I kind of think that that's the machine's relationship with us. You talk about consciousness. Sam Harris, Annika Harris, his wife, just wrote a book called Conscious, I think.
Yes.
Fantastic book. 2 hours in length, at least the audiobook is, so it's super short survey. But she starts talking at the end about panpsychism, right? Which is this idea that maybe consciousness is actually in everything. So this microphone is conscious that we're talking into. Your computer is conscious. Somehow the entities that are listening to us, that's far afield, but everything is conscious. What does that mean for the creation of AI? Are our computer programs already conscious? That raises all kinds of interesting moral questions about it. But I think even more interesting is this idea that, well, are things like corporations conscious? Are things like nations conscious? My background is in philosophy, so I had to read at one point Hobbes's Leviathan, which is where he basically comes out and says, look, the natural state of the world is horrible. It's an awful place that's bloody and filled with claws, basically. So we need government, we need nation states to kind of control man. And he viewed these governments as leviathans, right? They were the only things strong enough, the only entities strong enough to overcome mankind's brutal nature. So in that sense, they were necessary, but they had the tendency to go horribly wrong, right? He pointed out a whole kind of plethora of ways that nation states go wrong in his day. In our day, we'd be very familiar with North Korea as a nation state gone awry in the worst possible way. And some people might even say that America is a nation state going awry in many similar ways. But are these nation states conscious? I think the answer is yes. And I think corporations are another layer of consciousness on top of that. And what we're seeing with AI will be the next layer of consciousness above that. So in the same way that you and I, if you break it down, are just random firings, not random, purposeful firings of neurons that are overlaid by a layer of consciousness that we identify with, we will be to the AI as our neurons are to us. We will be the firings that allow it to kind of do the things it cares about. And those things probably aren't things that we can even comprehend, let alone worry about on a day-to-day basis. Just like your cells aren't worried that you're in a podcast right now, right? They're just worried, oh, I'm happy, I'm well-fed, whatever.
Right. And so if you look at any part of us, a cell, any part of our body, any part of our brain individually, it would be nonsense to say, well, that is a good person or a bad person. You wouldn't even know because you can't extract that from just a piece. But when you zoom out far enough, that's exactly what I thought about when you were mentioning the consciousness of a nation. Yeah. Is my finger conscious? No, but it's a part of me and I am in full.
Yeah.
And so similarly, companies, nations, or even a large group of people can generate its own a sort of consciousness. And I think one kind of shallow way to spotlight that example is if I mention the words France, Brazil, India. Different things come to mind for different countries. People have these perceptions in their mind. Perhaps that's some tendril of that country's consciousness that's mapping and interacting with what you think of it.
Yes. So memes, right? This idea of a building block that's somehow genetic and that it reproduces itself and passes on its own information or identity, but that exists ideally, that is not tangible, right? So a meme, I mean, hell, I don't even know if I could define it directly, but I know that it's not a concrete thing, right? I know that a meme isn't physical. It somehow exists in this idea space, but that space carries tangible consequences, right? So the Area 51 meme right now, this is my favorite thing because it shows the evolution of memes, right? So, God, what an exciting time to be alive when we can watch internet phenomenons like memes spread to the point where the US government has to react to it, right? If we're talking about conscious entities and the US government is a conscious entity and we are the little cells that make it up, what is a meme? Right? It's almost like a twinge that you get from your body or something, or like a little pain, or when your mind like switches to something and you don't understand why. That's almost how I conceptualize a meme at this different level of consciousness. But I think it points to the fact that there is an evolution happening in the realm of our ideas and in the realm of our consciousness, in the realm of our imagination, you might say. And I almost wonder if when we do create an artificial general intelligence, I'm of the opinion that we definitely will at some point in the future. Again, whether that's 5, 10, 15, 500 years from now, I just think that that's the inevitable trajectory we're on, I wonder if it'll be like that thing has been around all along, that it's almost intrinsic to nature, and that the things we're experiencing through memes and through this ideological landscape are its precursor, that's how it will communicate with us. It'll be through these underground upswellings of trends. Why is everyone suddenly obsessed with storming Area 51? Why now? Yeah. We could have done this back in the 70s, right? When it was first kind of being talked about. Well, it's only now that we're interconnected enough for this upper layer to kind of come into view. And the more we connect, the more we all start talking to each other and passing back and forth ideas, passing back and forth memes, the more I think that'll become apparent. And that's exciting. I mean, holy cow.
To get extremely woo-woo, sometimes I've thought, what if all of natural selection, all evolution that has occurred up to today, the rise of humanity, civilization, culture, what if it is just been AI's journey to creating itself?
Dude,
that it wanted to be created all along.
Yeah.
And it knew...
Yeah.
Or it's just the byproduct of what possibly happens. And it's been manifesting itself for billions of years.
So we view time linearly, right? We see an arrow of time. We see a past, a present, and a future very clearly because that's our experience. But there's nothing intrinsic to reality, I think, that says it has to be that way. Or at least people that are much smarter than me, I've heard them say that, right? So there's no reason why the past should be the past and the future should be the future. I think the human consciousness can in some ways be defined as the time we experience. So in some ways, the human consciousness is only that the past is the past for them, the present is the present, and the future is the future. That this experience is in some way definitive of what it means to be a human. And I wonder if, again, once we do create AGI, we'll find out that, we can interact with the past just as clearly as we can interact with the future, and that this machine is capable of doing that kind of stuff. And it has caused itself to be in some kind of weird snake eating its own tail kind of way. And we're just another step in that process. But I'm not pessimistic in the sense that I think that machine will then turn around and destroy us. I mean, I think would you destroy your own cells and your own body kind of deal? How exciting.
Yeah.
How terribly exciting. To kind of pull this all together, maybe the point of my play, the point of the Comic-Con thing, kind of what I'm all leading up into is what I'm started referring to as faux society. So we talk about stories, we talk about apocalypses. My story revolves around an apocalypse. The idea is that 50 some years in the future, the year 2076, the world is about to end. We've been invaded by aliens. We've created super intelligent computers, and now humanity is kind of trapped between the two. And I think the point of my story is that the main character has to make a decision trapped between these disparate forces. And that, I think, is the decision. Well, long-term goal, I hope to make it a choose-your-own-adventure story in the truest sense, where that decision point, that final decision about which way humanity will go and what will happen to us, after readers have experienced this story with me and gotten all the way to that point, will then be turned over to them. And it will be a true choice in the sense that they can do anything they want. They can, in aggregate, of course, the idea is everybody who enjoys the story gets to kind of tune in and help decide how it goes. But in aggregate, help decide, okay, well, how does this main character who is placed in this impossible situation move forward? And I make that the main choice of the story because honestly, I have no idea how to move forward in that situation myself. But that's really the conversation I'm interested in having. And, if people are out there and are interested in the same kind of stuff, I love talking about this. I love discussing all the little possibilities, even the woo stuff, and would invite them to come and interact at my website, wdd.world. Or wddlive@gmail.com is another good way to get a hold of me.
Okay, and you have your play coming up?
Yes, sir.
And then Fort Collins Comic-Con, you'll be putting on a panel and...
Yeah, we'll be running a game there. So the idea is that it will be... Still kind of working on it, to be honest. I had a first brush idea that it's just going to be too intensive, but it's going to be puzzle-based. It's going to be interactive between different players. So the idea is players can pick up a badge at my table and through small thumbs up, thumbs down interactions with other con goers, amass points, and maybe win a prize at the end. So this year, one of the things I love about your podcast, or loved about the More You NoCo, is that you guys pick local charities to support. And we've actually, I've been speaking to and working with a group called No Barriers USA in Fort Collins. They're a group that helps veterans as well as youth, primarily in the foster care system, I believe, have experiences that get them to transcend the trauma that they've gone through. So again, using story and using the idea of context and getting people in new places and experiencing life and through new lenses to kind of solve their problems. Not solve. Life is hard, but
Right.
help address.
Well, that's perfect. And Corey, I feel like we've only read chapter 1 of 1,000 chapters, but this was great. Thank you for an interesting conversation.
Thank you.
And if people want to follow up with you, you mentioned your website, plays, Comic-Con.
Yes, sir.
Hopefully people will connect and come out of the woodwork for you.
I would love to talk more about all this kind of stuff, and I think the chances are only going to be more and more in the future.
Excellent. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, sir.
For more about this podcast or our other guests, visit www.themoreyouKnowco.com. We have had so many wonderful conversations, you have to give the other episodes a shot. You never know what you're going to find. Thank you to Trevor for mixing and editing all our episodes. Thank you to Kelsey for our awesome logo and artwork. And Russell Isaac Long, my man, and guest of episode 67, is responsible for all our music used here on The More You Know Co. So grateful for you, my friend. We will be back soon, listener. Who will it be? What the heck are we going to discuss next? Until next time, peace.